Well, first of all, thanks to everybody for being here, both panelists and guests. And I was trying to think how to start out. I was thinking that I wanted to say I'm grateful for a lot of things. I'm grateful for my colleagues. I'm grateful for readers. I think once upon a time that newspapers took readers for granted. Maybe we'd worked in the newsroom. Of course, people, read what we put out there every day. And I don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah.
And I also don't think readers take us for granted. I think anybody that's been paying attention realizes what's happened to newspapers in the last decade or so, and particularly the last few years. We were talking about how there's testimony before Congress the other day, and News Guild president cited that in the last 16 years, more than 2,000 newsrooms have shut down across the country, and half as many journalists are working today as a decade ago. And certainly locally, we've gone from, what is the stat in 2017, 62 employees to 20 some now. I think 22 is our stat. So it's hit hard everywhere. It's hit particularly hard here. And I will say I'm encouraged. We have 3 positions right now out there posted that we can fill, 3 of our losses. So that's encouraging. But obviously there's many reasons to be concerned for the future. So that was kind of what I was going to say is the jumping off point. And maybe David, you could start off talking about what the big picture is these days.
Well, I think you really did a great job portraying the big picture. And in some ways, the word bloodbath might be a good way to describe it in terms of the loss of entirety of daily newspapers, the deep cuts in staffing. We've seen a lot of our colleagues, hardworking people who no longer have jobs at the Times Union, and that has been repeated over and over again at newsrooms across the country. And, even if the newspapers are still exist in name, the real concern is that they become kind of like ghost newspapers, zombie newspapers, where yes, they have sort of this legacy impact. They've been around for, in our case, since 150 years roughly. And so there's that legacy is there, and yet they're hollowed out from the inside. And that's a real concern as well, even if the paper's not closed. And then the bigger picture too is that, newspapers are really a meeting place for the community. They're a place where the first draft of history has been written. There are great journalists in this town who work for a different lot of media organizations, not just newspaper, but radio, TV, alternative publications. They're all great reporters. I think there's something that's unique about a newspaper in terms of its ability to dive deep, to have that institutional history. And so that's why I think there's something that's really worth supporting, preserving, strengthening the daily newspaper industry. I certainly believe that to be the case here in Jacksonville with the Florida Times Union.
Yeah, very true, very true. Steve, maybe you can talk more detail about what we're dealing with here.
What we're dealing with here in terms of staffing changes, yeah, we've gone since October 2017. We had 62 people in our newsroom. We now have 22 people. That's to cover a 1.6 million person community, as a million people in Jacksonville, and then 600,000 roughly in the other 4 counties within the Jacksonville MSA. And that's been an ongoing challenge to figure out what we can cover, to remind people that they are part of really a broader community. So that is an ongoing issue.
Right. Yeah, one thing I was thinking about that we try and emphasize and talk about is how we're a part of this community. It's not just our job. We don't just work here. Most of us have settled here. My daughter went through public school here. We have in our newsroom a lot of people who've been around a long time in the city. And then folks like somebody like John, who grew up here and, went away, but we're glad he came back. And I don't know, maybe you could talk about your perspective, John, because you do I think we have a few folks who literally grew up here in the newsroom and have been here. But maybe you can talk about your perspective of the Times Union and being back here.
Yeah, I mean, that was like, like I said the other day, I'm probably on the tail end of my career now. 34 years, and, to come back, I've been here since 2017, and, just to have that opportunity to come back to your hometown, and, I probably see it as finishing up my career here. But, it's challenges, I'm a guy whose father used to be a subscriber of the newspaper back in the 70s. So I've seen a lot of bylines from people, and kind of, I went away for 24 years working in New Orleans, but I always used to come back and read the Times Union. And I just think, my own personal opinion, I just think the newspaper has challenges and the city has challenges. And I really feel that diversity is very important, that, you have to have a newsroom that looks like, in order to cover it well, you have to have a newsroom that looks similar to the community that you cover. And right now, we're not at that point. But and hopefully that'll change, I think it needs to be changed. And I know, like you said, you got 3 openings, and I hope that's moving in the direction for that. But one thing, when you come back to your hometown newspaper, you feel like you have I feel I have a bigger responsibility here than I did in New Orleans, because I'm attached. I'm always even when I was working in New Orleans, I was still attached to my hometown, my relatives here. My family go back probably 6 generations here in Jacksonville. My family, I think the roots started in Nixon Town. And, I just feel that when you from your community and you're born and raised, you see friends, you see family members, and you want your hometown newspaper to be like perfection. You want it to be a way that the community can hear, that they hear their voices, and you proud to say you work there. So that comes with a lot of responsibility. It's, you go in the neighborhoods, you might see people that, I've seen some people in the neighborhood probably I hadn't seen in 20 years, and people have concerns. And I think as to be like, the newspaper of record in our town here, that a way that we have to do everything. Journalism to me is that you do everything possible to serve your community. And you write the tough stories, you write the hard stories, you write the community. So it comes with the oriented stories to change the community for the better. And, you look at the numbers that we have right now with our newspaper, it is a challenge. I don't think there's anybody on our staff that's not working, probably the jobs of 2 people. And when you're in a situation and people have condition like that, I don't think you can do your best work when you tax like that. But it is what it is. That's our business. That's what it is. And hopefully we'll get those positions filled. And we need to diversify our newsroom. I said this a week ago in a meeting that I never want to be the only one of anything. And I don't want to be preaching, but I don't want to be the only one of nothing, to be honest. I just want to be a journalist. I don't want to go around this town and have this stigma that I'm the only Black journalist at the Times Union, or the only minority at the Times Union. I didn't ask for that stigma. I don't want it. And I've never been in that position before, and I've been in this business for 34 years. So it's different, and I hope it changes. I just want to be known as the journalist, not the Black journalist, or the only one journalist of color in a city of of Jacksonville is with the size over 1 million people. So got a lot of feelings about it, and I just hope things, progress has to happen. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, well said. I think we'd all agree, and I know, I don't want to speak for, local management. I think would echo a lot of that. But yeah, I think we all agree. And yeah, obviously it's important to have you talk about diversity, but I don't want to just throw, hey, a diversity question, I'm going to throw it at John kind of thing. Because yeah, we'll quiz you on Jaguars too or something, because we realize, yeah, we don't want just to say, oh, he's our Black journalist. He's, like you said, you just want to be known as a journalist, and hopefully we'll get to that point where, yeah, that will not be, will not jump out that we have this ratio. We can come back maybe in a bit and talk more about what the Guild is talking about that. But I wanted to make sure to include Ms. Washington. And I also wanted to say, if people have questions, that they, could throw those out in Q&A in the chat, throw those out in Andrew Pantazzi, who's kind of moderating behind the scenes. We'll make sure we see him. Ms. Washington, maybe you could talk about your perspective. I mean, explain to people what you do in the community, what you've done all these years, your background, and then kind of your perspective on the paper, whatever you want to say about it, good, bad, ugly, what you think, why it's important, any thoughts at all about the Times-Union, we'd appreciate it, I think.
Well, thanks so much, Mark. I just want to say I was glad to hear from John Reed that he's a native of Jacksonville. So am I. I was born here at Brewster Hospital, okay? And almost over 70 years ago, but we won't go there, but it's a long, long time ago. And of course, I lived in Houston, Texas for about 11 years after I got my degree, and taught at Houston Community College. Then I decided to come home to Jacksonville. I've been back almost 30 years. So I've been here. And I can remember, like John, getting the paper, the Florida Times-Union and the Jacksonville Journal. I can remember those days of reading it. We took it at home. So we read it. And so we read the paper. The paper is so significant and important in Jacksonville, I think. But of course, I'm a political scientist by trade. And I am in the community because I taught at, it is now Florida State College, but for many, many years, Florida Community College. So I'm of the community, I feel it. I'm out there all the time getting, ideas and looking at some of the problems in Jacksonville. And I have done this from time to time, not a lot, but occasionally I would contribute pieces to the Times-Union and the editorial page, not just letters to the editor, but just short little editorials about what's going on in Jacksonville. And there's so much there that we need to do in this consolidated city. That is not, it's so much that's happening. What I really like about the Times-Union in terms of the local story is that just the other day, maybe it's been about 4 or 5 months ago, you did a piece on, you've been doing something on Ken Knight Drive, and that's a particular interest to me because Ken Knight was my uncle. Ken Knight was a disc jockey here, it's a long story, but he was married to my mother's sister. So we have a history here. Family, brothers, all my brother here, my sisters are here. So I feel a strong need to pull in for Jacksonville, Florida. And I think it's so interesting and intriguing that when Jacksonville was selected as for the convention site for the Republican National Convention, that was an opportunity right there to show what the Florida Times-Union could do. And you guys were on it. You did some interesting articles and lead up to it. And of course, I think it indicates to me that not only Florida is important, but Jacksonville is important on a national scale. And for us to not have a paper would just be an abysmal issue. It would be a terrible thing for us if we were to lose our local newspaper. We desperately need it. We have issues in Jacksonville that has been caused by consolidation that I won't somewhat about it, but these racial issues are sort of centered in consolidation. And until we can figure those things out, and the newspaper has a vital role in that and a continual role in that. And I think, it's just so important to where we are in the city and what we are doing and not only in the city and the state, but on the national level. And of course, I wrote a little piece to the management team and pretty much spelled out some things I felt about the role of the newspaper in general in the community. That, you know, if without churches, without schools, without universities, without civic organizations, there really is no community, and we need the paper as well. One last thing I'll say here before I go, because I remember I was a professor for almost 40 years, so I could go and I could go before a class and lecture, and they have to tell me to stop when the time is going. But as a professor and teaching American government and Florida politics, what people do not know is the ignorance is, I mean, that's a little, I don't want to sound too elitist, but people are not informed. And the paper's job is to, and they can do even more of that, but just, I had my students to read the paper, to do their article, to do a paper on the newspaper. So they would read the newspaper, not necessarily just the Florida Times Union, but read the newspaper and then write articles on current event, an entire paper on one particular current event in the news and center on that particular issue specifically. So with all that said and done, I would do, I think there's some ideas I have in terms of what the newspaper might consider in terms of more community involvement. This is just kind of top of head issues, but I think being much more visible, maybe a slogan, you know, just getting out there and being a little bit more in touch and touching it and letting people, don't forget we're here. And you don't go to Instagram, and you don't always go to Facebook, which is terrible for when I see even my nieces, and they're like, here's the news. And they're telling me news over Facebook. And I'm like, no. So I'm the lecturer, so I'll stop there. If you have some other questions, Mark, I'll be happy. But I can't emphasize enough the need, not only for diversity in the newsroom, which I am a strong advocate for. The Times Union certainly needs that, considering the diversity, the growing diversity of the community, the left out parts of the community, and the fact that the newspaper just has to, and it needs to exist. I thought about this when Edward Waters College had some problems a while back. They've been in and out of problems, but at one time I said to my students, I said, if EWC were to close down, then what would happen to Black Jacksonville? I mean, that would, and that's the way I feel about the Times Union in a way. The paper of record has to stay. So.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. It's always, and we really appreciate you and others saying things like that. And we know the paper has its flaws now. It has a long history of flaws, but we're also very, very proud of it. And we, believe in journalism, believe in the paper, and we don't mind people being critical of us. We want, and tell us what they think we can do better. And, but we really appreciate that when people get the need for having a paper and why with its flaws and with its hurdles, it's important. So we really appreciate that. We had a couple questions. One was, can someone address the difference between local management and Gannett? Who does what? I don't know who wants to take that, David, or? I think you're muted.
Thanks. Yeah, so the difference between local management, Gannett, obviously Gannett is the biggest newspaper chain in the country. It's 260, I think, daily newspapers, then they got hundreds of weeklies. So they are a gigantic corporation. As far as management locally, I think there's a lot of support for the local management in the newsroom. We certainly feel like we're all in it together. And we feel, been able to, as I say, punch above our weight in terms of being able to work on stories that, despite all the staff cuts, we've been able to really have an impact on the community through a lot of different things. Ms. Washington mentioned the coverage of the Republican National Convention. I think that was one where we brought a lot of issues, concerns, facts to light. Certainly our coverage of JEA was a real standout, I think. A coverage of some of the issues around the schools that led up to the half-cent sales tax approval in the referendum in November. So I think we've been really engaged in the conversation. I think a lot of that credit goes to just having excellent editors and working with our local management to to every day try and put out the best news we could with the resources we have. I think outside of Jacksonville, I think part of it is we just don't really know the people outside of Jacksonville. I mean, it's a huge corporation. They have decisions they're making across this giant chain about where to put their investments and resources.
Mhm.
So part of what we've wanted to do as a newsroom is just to shine a spotlight as much as we possibly can on Jacksonville as a place that's, we think, should be a great fit for what Gannett wants to do. You know, we're a growing city. We're a news-rich territory. There's a lot going on. We think, you know, they invest in Jacksonville. They shouldn't just do it just for the good of it. We think it's good business for them as well. And so that's part of the challenge we've had, is just trying to be able to reach people outside Jacksonville as they're going through this giant corporate mergers and acquisitions and everything else that they're doing, and bring some attention to Jacksonville. So, you know, I think that's sort of the challenge we have as a newsroom, is that tremendous amount of support inside the newsroom for the editors. We work with them every day, with Mary Kelly Polka and the other editors we have. But, you know, we still are trying to stand out in this huge corporate entity that has some financial challenges, also a lot of financial opportunities, and bring attention to Jacksonville for all the reasons that Ms. Washington said, make this paper indispensable to this community.
Mhm.
Yeah, well said, David. Yeah, I'd echo that. I think part of the reason we have punched above our weight is because Mary Kelly Polka, our editor, chose, you know, she knew we couldn't do all the things we did in the past. So we had to decide, what can we do? And we've tried to, you know, when we were latched onto JEA, you know, we may not get around to this or this, but we're going to make sure we stay on top of this, or, you know, Lot J, or the RNC, or a lot of these issues. Now there's a lot of things that we don't get around to, and a lot of things we should get around to, which is why, a great reason why we want more staff. And to coming back to your point, yeah, the opportunity, I think it's important to kind of maybe spin it to the positive, the opportunity for Gannett, you know, talking about increasing subscribers, that we have, you know, as Steve mentioned earlier, 1.6 million people here. If you're looking for a place with a lot of potential subscribers that we've lost, to get them back and get new subscribers, to Jacksonville seems like a great place. So I think that's one of the goals when we do events like that, is to emphasize that opportunity. Somebody else asked another question from the audience, said, seems to me that having to buy the paper from corporate or even purely private ownership, it said, how can we start the conversation with Gannett about selling the Times-Union to us like Green Bay owns the Packers? As a Packers fan, I like that. Yeah, I know. I think a lot of times we have seen other cities take on different models and things. I don't know if, you know, I think that's, I don't know if Steve or David wants to talk about that. I think you're muted, Steve.
I think it's, I don't know of many models where readers themselves collectively purchase a paper the way you may have the fans of the Packers who own the Packers. But we do see nonprofits are being set up where somebody comes in and says, you know what, I will run the newspaper as a nonprofit entity, and I'm not going to try and make all the decisions based on quarterly earnings. And I think there's a inherent value to having what a newspaper does. And, you know, I want to make enough money to have a mission, but it's not necessary to always be beating revenue expectations and that kind of thing. So that is becoming more common. And I frankly think that as we move more and more towards a digital mode, away from really all the heavy production costs that are associated with putting out a print product, it could be that that's going to become more economically feasible and viable for nonprofits to seek to purchase newspapers, legacy papers, or even start their own and create a competitive landscape, which the legacy papers really need to watch out for, in my view, and be prepared for that. And that means staffing their newsrooms and making it where somebody thinks twice about trying to go head to head with them. But there is some of that going on. I think there's on the national level, there's a guy who owns a hotel chain out of the Baltimore area who wants to purchase the Baltimore Sun and run it as a nonprofit. So it's happening, and it could start to happen more, but it does take money up front. It's still, it's the nonprofit sector still would need to go into it with its eyes open. But certainly that'd be a model, and could be in some ways a preferable model to having compared to a for-profit corporation running the show.
Yeah. Yeah, there certainly has been, not just here, but in a lot of places in the country, many more conversations like that. So it will be interesting to see what happens elsewhere, where these lead, because I think we may see a somewhat different landscape in 10 years. I don't know about here. I don't know about Gannett, but that is a twist that we are seeing more and more of. Wanted to bring up the joint letter signed by 4 mayors, 4 previous mayors, about their hopes and fears for the future of the newsroom. I don't know who's best to talk about that. Steve, is that kind of something you were?
I would be happy to. So I think that in my mind, it mattered a lot that we got these 4 mayors who between them ran city government here for 24 years to say something about the need to improve staffing here. Because each of these 4 guys, we got under their skin a lot when they were in office. And make no apologies about that. That's our job. And we might have annoyed them. And sometimes I know we annoyed them, but we said things, we raised points that were fair. And the city was, I think, better off for having done that. And so to have these guys now come back and say to our ownership, hey, this newspaper matters to this city, and it matters to the sake of the people here. That was really that was really satisfying and deeply appreciated. But it's just I took it as just a sign that that these people recognize some value in what's done in the journalism business.
Yeah, definitely. You don't see, I can't think too many instances of, all the previous living mayors issuing some kind of joint statement. So that alone, I found interesting, and, coming from different points of view on a lot of different issues. And you're right, butted heads with them. I mean, remember when Ron Littlepage retired, he had some former mayors there that said, they came and they patted him on the back and said, why couldn't you have retired about 10 years earlier or 20 years earlier, depending on when they were in office. So they got angry with him then, got angry at the paper maybe, but also later came to appreciate us. So so that meant a lot to see that too. I don't know, did John or David, you want to add anything about the letters?
Yeah, I think it is impressive that all 4 of them signed it jointly. And I thought that the points they made about how the Times-Union was there to kind of bring together the community discussion. It's a place where it's kind of like almost a gathering spot for these big decisions, for highlighting problems, for looking at solutions. That, in a nutshell, is the value that a newspaper brings to a community, and it does it in a way that that gets results. And I think that's something that a person who is in a position like a mayor can appreciate. And, as to Steve's point, maybe sometimes that sort of scrutiny doesn't work to the political benefit of a mayor, but it also can be something that is helpful to a mayor when putting together an agenda. And so, and that's the value of a newspaper. No newspaper in that sort of debate gets darkened, without a doubt.
Right. And something else that hit me that kind of comes back to the sense of community and things is that just the amount of institutional knowledge, well, two things. The amount we've lost in recent years, when we've talked about the cuts, just a mind-boggling amount of institutional knowledge. We just had Sandy Strickland, who had been at the paper for 50 plus years. She made it. I think Sandy knew every story and everybody in town, and losses like that. But how much we still have. I just hit my 20th anniversary, and people were kidding with me about being the new kid in the newsroom, because we have a lot of institutional knowledge in our newsroom. And that kind of leads into one of the things the Guild has been talking about, that there's a fair number of people who are in their 60s or close to their 60s that will be, in the next, who knows, however long, retiring. And that's one of the goals of the newsroom, is when we lose people, whether it's by them moving on, by them retiring, what do we do? And that, I don't know, maybe you can talk about, I'm not sitting in on negotiations, so maybe you can get into that, what you are trying to negotiate, what the goals are as far as filling spots, as far as diversity. I see Gary Smith says close to 60. I'm not quite there yet. Yeah, I'm like 2 months away. So anyway, I don't know if either of you can talk about, or any of you can talk about what has been talked about in bargaining, because I'm not sitting in on that.
What we've asked them to do is to agree to fill positions that become vacant when someone just leaves or retires under ordinary business conditions. If there's a big financial crisis and the company decides it has to lay people off to stay afloat, we're not asking them to fill those jobs, because we realize that happens when there's a real emergency. But we're asking them in the run of ordinary day-to-day business. If I leave for another job, just find someone to fill my spot. And the second part, it's a corollary to this, we're asking them, when you do that, do basically a decent search for candidates who are either women or minorities. Basically, do a search for job candidates who are not represented sufficiently in our newsroom, and simply look at these folks, not asking them to guarantee that certain jobs are going to go to any minority or any targeted group, but just consider applicants. And we really think that if this happens, that the process of retirement for those of us who are getting older becomes a positive way of reshaping our newspaper. I'm close behind Mark, but we still both on paper have a little ways to go until we're at retirement age. But I've spent 34 years here, and I've thought that because in that 34 years, I've heard a lot from people. I've had conversations with Black readers about why they should trust me as I'm talking to them about some sensitive subject. And my paper has a lot of baggage, has a lot to be accountable for. But I've spent my career telling people yeah, I know that happened, but I'm here now and I'm asking you this in good faith, talk to me. And I think that now, as I get to a point where I'm close to retiring, if leaving if retiring now can lead to my paper looking around and considering applicants and getting a newsroom that looks more like the community it covers, then my retiring will be in a way a gift. It will be a good that can be brought to our coverage of Jacksonville. And I think that would be really wonderful. So I just don't want to be, I just don't want to turn out the light and go away. I want someone there to take my place and take your place and take everyone else's place, because there's still going to be people in town who want to know stuff, who need to know things. And they're not going to get that same information as reliably from somewhere from any of the other media. Newspapers have a special role they fill, and it is up to us to keep that role working.
Yeah, very good points. And yeah, when I think about how far we've the reductions, how severe they've been, I don't know what percentage it would have been layoffs, buyouts, retirement. But you're right there's been a certain run where it's been when people left, it almost was the same as a layoff, because we very often did not fill spots. So a lot of the attrition has been through exactly what you're describing. So, I mean, it's a small measure, but the 3 spots being open now and a search for those gives me kind of a glimmer of hope that hopefully it's not the same old, because that just didn't happen very often. Anytime anybody left, that position was gone. I mean, be here and there. I remember, this position would be filled, but more often than not, that was, I think, seen as, oh, good, we cut that newsroom a little bit more. So it would be nice to not to feel that way. If somebody left, like you said, you or I left, that yes, somebody would be stepping in. They'd be, and maybe adding to the newsroom in different ways, and the diversity you talked about. David or John or Ms. Washington, you want to add anything?
Well, I just want to say that there's so much, when you did this is personal, when you did your stories on Florida Community College and the scandal with our former Dr. Wallace, that was a story that needed to be done, that was needed to be done here. And it was so important because was so long, it was lingering for such a long time. And when the paper got its jaws into it and sort of extracted the truth, it was so important for Florida State College. So stories like that, and as you mentioned, the JEA, it's those local stories and national too, but Jacksonville is local and national. I mean, I think that point cannot be driven home, I think, hard enough. That our role, that we're no longer, we have a lot, because I lived in Houston for all those years, so I know we're not where Houston is, or even Atlanta, or even New Orleans, although, we're not quite, there's so many things that need to be done in Jacksonville that can be done through the role of the paper, just doing more information and community building. And, I can go on all the things that the newspaper can do, but those particular local stories that made a difference. And actually, I'll just say that there's more work that you guys need to do at FSCJ as well, but that I'll save that for another time and place.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd forgotten that.
Don't forget it. They're still there. It's still
I wasn't writing much of that, but that was quite the
story.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, and I think as I recall that story, that was one where we had a couple of reporters who they weren't tasked with doing daily assignments. They basically were given the time and space to make the public records request,
And go
research
over.
it, get the interviews. And we still have been able to do that even with the short staffing because we just think that's the mission of the paper.
Yes, yes. But the money involved was tremendous. I mean, the financial aid issues and duping of the students and not telling the truth and the whole nine, the role of the corruption. And you guys were on it, and boy, we were appreciative of that. We needed that. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, as I was getting ready for this, I was kind of run down the newsroom in my head, and it's kind of scary that I can do it in my head now, that I can kind of, even though we're working from home, I can go kind of cubicle by cubicle. But I was thinking about how, yeah, we're so, it's so small compared to before, but I'm like, so impressed. I don't want to leave anybody out, but I was going in my head, cubicle by cubicle, what each person does. And I'm really, really proud of all my colleagues. I mean, John, you guys in sports, what is it now? A 3-person sports staff, basically. We have a 1-person photo staff, but he's Bob Self is unbelievable. This amazing shooter. We have, one of the few new hires in recent years was Emily Block, doing a great job in education. We have Gary doing, Gary's always been a workhorse on golf. He gets out there and he's just cranking out absurd amounts of copy, and that hasn't changed, but it's even more important now. Watching him cover the players is, I've kind of missed being out there because it's always fun watching Gary work for this week. David and Steve and Beth doing nonprofits. We've seen the value of that. Matt Sorgel's storytelling. I should have started with Clayton. Clayton is like a one-man machine doing anything and everything. Of course, my fellow columnist, Nate, pissing people off left and right. Tom Zarletto doing features. Anyway, I know I'm going to forget people and all that. I feel like we used to, once upon a time, we complained about how many editors there were. And I think we maybe had a valid criticism. I don't do that anymore at all because our editors are working their butts off, and we could use more editors. When readers complain about we have typos and this and that, yeah, once upon a time we had more eyes looking at our copy, and that's not the case anymore. So anyway, that's all my thinking. It's this big double-edged sword that we've had so many cuts, but I maybe don't say it often enough to my colleagues that I'm really proud of everything that they do day in, day out. And I feel like when the paper's there in the morning, it's this, I think it's been referred to as the daily miracle, and it feels even more like that, especially this past year and pandemic, working remotely. Anyway, that's a tangent. But we could do more. Give us 3 more bodies, and then give us 3 more. And I'm sure, Mary Kelly could find lots of different ways we could use more positions. So.
Yeah, without a doubt, Mark. I don't know, I did notice there was one question by somebody about,
Let's see.
do you want to read it, Mark, or I can read it? It's about, I think your local news effort is excellent, especially considering the challenges you face. What part of the equation is the financial challenge of putting out a print edition 7 days a week? I know some newspapers now only distribute print editions on certain days of the week. If we were willing to sacrifice a 7-day-a-week printed product, which I personally would find very sad, do you think there would be additional investment in newsroom personnel? I can take a stab at that, but I was interested in Ms. Washington. Do you still get the print product? Does it still
Get
show
the
up on your-
digital. I get the digital, and partly because of getting from my door, walking to get the news. That's an issue for me. So I get the digital.
And when did you make that switch? Has that been recent?
When I retired. Yeah. When I retired, because it was I live in a neighborhood, and anyway, it's just easier for me to do the digital at this
Yeah.
point. Okay. I want to make sure I get my paper. So
Yeah. I mean, I can take a stab at that. I will say personally, I do miss the days when we were all print and you kind of leave the office at night knowing that there was some big story that was going to pop all at once on driveways, you know, a couple of 100,000 driveways throughout the city. And,
yeah,
you know, now obviously you write it, it goes up, you write it, it goes up. It's sort of this insatiable, insatiable beast that you're just feeding all the time. But as far as the question, you know, some newspapers have reduced their print editions to just a few days a week. And that has been a cost-cutting move. The trade-off there is that I don't necessarily think that if we did that today, it would mean more resources for the Times-Union, because even with all the reductions in print advertising and the loss of classified ads as a big resource, financial resource, and automobile ads and home sale ads, because people can get that information and do get it from other sources, there's still a lot of our revenue does come still from print advertising. So if they stopped the print advertising, it would be maybe a zero-sum game. Maybe you save some money on the production costs, but then you lose a lot of ad revenue. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. I would love to see it where it never happens, and there's always a print product, because I think there's something to be said for having that curated product where it's full of the news. You read that from start to finish. You feel like you're a well-informed citizen, even if you never pick up your iPhone the rest of the day to scan the Jacksonville.com website. But the reality is that it's probably a matter of time before some of those print products, even the Times-Union, go away. I hope that doesn't happen, but I don't think it's imminent. I think it's pretty far down the road, relatively speaking, still. At least I hope that's the case.
Yeah, but you're right that, I mean, the Tampa Bay Times, which I never thought would see not be 7 days a week, and they're down, I think they're 2 days a week. And John, back in your stomping ground, New Orleans, I forget, is there not a 7 day a week paper there now? Or, but yeah, when that comes up, I always have thought, I want a daily paper. I want a print product that's there, but it may, you know, realistically, there is going to be a time, I don't know when that is, when probably more and more will all be digital. And hopefully they can figure out, you know, to the question about additional investment, a way to, this is kind of out of our control, but they can figure out ways to monetize the product better. And we can do that. But I love the idea of a daily paper. And, you know, when I go through the archives, you know, you're researching something from, you know, whatever, 1901, you know, the fire or whatever, you know, you look back at that day's paper, and it tells you not only that day's big news that you were looking for, but all these, I get, you know, down all these rabbit holes, because I look at what else was going on, look at what sports was going on, look at the advertising. And it to me, it's this amazingly cool snapshot, that day, that moment in history. So I wonder about that when newspapers aren't printed 7 days a week. 100 years from now, how does you know, somebody figure out what happened on, you know, March 16th, 2021? Maybe you know, type that into the internet, show you everything from that day. I don't know. Or you won't be typing into the internet by that point. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, New Orleans is, in my mind, was such a great newspaper town, and it's one of those where it's just sad to see how much it's changed. I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, it still hurts me to my heart, because the real New Orleans Times-Picayune is going under.
Oh,
You know, they were bought out by the Advocate. So, I don't know. I had a lot of friends down in New Orleans, but boy, that was a blow.
Yeah, I remember Bob Self and I went there after Katrina repeatedly. And one of the things that struck me beyond just what we covered was how important the Times-Picayune was to the community there. And I just thought I was really impressed, and it was kind of respected and appreciated. It felt like in all, we talk about diversity, things like that. It felt like it was appreciated all over town there and had this connection and ties, and people
Well, Mark,
understood what the journalists were doing to get the story then. And for it to go away just is, sad.
Well, that's what happened, management, something that you spoke about. New Orleans was the first newspaper to go digital, total digital. And as you said, I mean, it had a lot of loyal readers in New Orleans, and the way that they portrayed the change just didn't reflect the city. And they didn't go back. The advocate came in from Baton Rouge into the city, and that wiped out the newspaper, basically.
We had one question here, how people can help, and we really appreciate Ms. Washington and others who, wrote letters and things and expressed their thoughts about the paper. But I don't know how, David and Stephen John, what you would say, how else obviously people could subscribe, digital or print. That's a big way. But that's probably one of the biggest ways. But how else would you say people could help?
Well, I've got to say one thing here. It's real simple, which is if you sent a letter already, you sent an email already, thank you very much for doing that. But talk to your friends, talk to other people who seem plugged into the city, and tell them, hey, I did this, and here's why, and here's why I think that this paper matters. And it took me all 10 minutes to send an email to these people at Gannett, and I care about the newspaper, and hopefully some of the rest of Jacksonville will end up doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I would say, like kind of what we talked about before, I would kind of the message to be, this is an opportunity for you. You want subscribers. This is a place where we feel like if you invest in this paper, it will pay off for you.
I want to drop in one stat here. The University of Florida says that in the next 10 years, the Jacksonville metro area will grow by 250,000 people. So if you're trying to figure out where you can hope to sell subscriptions, we got to have 250,000 people coming in who aren't here now and need somewhere to turn for news.
Yeah, that's a good selling point for me.
Picking up on what Steve is saying, the model going forward is recognition that some of that advertising is never coming back. And so they're really looking forward to have a business model that's based on growing a bigger and bigger revenue from subscriptions, and getting people used to the idea that this is a value to you and you pay for it. And so what Steve is saying is exactly right. And it feels like the kind of thing where there should be an alignment between what we want and what the company wants, which is we want the same thing. We want people reading our stuff. We'd like people to see the value in paying for it. And part of that as well is, the more good news coverage we can do, the more people are going to want to turn to us to pay for it. So it feels like there's an opportunity for everybody to kind of pull the rope in the same direction, which doesn't always happen in this business, but maybe there's this opportunity for that to happen going forward, provided there's solid investment in newsrooms to be able to attract and keep those subscribers.
Right. You certainly see places where there's hedge funds and there's things that there doesn't seem to be any hope of that. You know, there's investment is not the goal. It's like stripping parts from a car kind of thing. So that's, I think, like what what you guys keep emphasizing is that that's what we want to avoid happening. And we think it benefits everyone to not do that. It's, it's good for us. It's good for, we would think for business, it's good for the community. That's why we're trying to do something like this that involves community. We really appreciate, I think I've heard more positives about the paper. And I think in the past year, I think people, like I said at the beginning, that we maybe don't take readers for granted and they don't take us for granted. And it was kind of interesting with JEA. I told work for JEA. My wife used to work for JEA, and then, you know, everybody would complain about their about their utility. But then when somebody wanted to take away their utility and sell it, people rallied around JEA, and I told them I thought that in a weird way, that would, if I worked for JEA, it would have to make me feel good that people. It took this for them to appreciate it, but people did express their appreciation about what JEA does and about maybe their customer service or their response during hurricanes. And they might still have criticisms of JEA, but there also was appreciation. And I think I felt some of the same thing about us in our coverage of JEA and a lot of these issues we've talked about tonight, and there's many more. So I think we've only got maybe a minute left. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything.
I just want to thank Ms. Washington for joining us. In my Rolodex, in the era before cell phones and putting in phone numbers there, I have a handwritten your phone number and your name, and so it's always good to see you. And I think that's part of the value of local journalism is that, you know, hopefully when I call Ms. Washington, she knows me, I know her, and there's a relationship that's been built there, and that's important to the newspaper going forward. And a concern that, you know, that we do lose some of that every time we lose people in our newsroom. So, but it is great to see you again, and I want to thank you for joining us on this panel and the support that you've given to the newspaper in so many ways. Appreciate it.
Okay. And I thank you, and I'm not finished yet, so I'll continue to contribute. But one last thing about the Black community in Jacksonville, I think the writers should continue to consider civic organizations, especially African-American sororities and fraternities, as something you guys may want to look at, because that's a big issue with the vice president being a member of a Black sorority. There are all kinds of things there we can talk about, but that's a sort of an outreach that I think we can go through that way too.
Sounds good.
I like it. Yep. We
Yeah.
definitely welcome. We're always looking for story ideas, and
All right. Yeah, they're there.
yes,
Okay.
please send them our way.
I will. I will.
And not just story ideas, but right, the matter of outreach too. I think that community engagement is something we've talked a lot about, but I think community engagement leads to really good stories. So it goes hand in hand. Anyway, I think we've bumped up. I don't know if it cuts off after an hour or not. Andrew was kind of mentioning, but it's probably a good time to wrap up anyway. And I really appreciate everybody being here, both on the panel and people who jumped in to watch and listen. So thanks, guys, and thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.